There's a photograph from 1942 that shouldn't exist. A woman stands in her victory garden holding a basket of tomatoes almost too heavy to carry. Her garden is dense, mulched thick with straw, plants crowded together in ways that break every modern spacing rule. That garden fed her family through the war years. No fertilizer, no pesticides, no rototiller. Just techniques passed down through generations of women who understood something we forgot. Somewhere between then and now, those techniques became wrong. Real gardening required products, equipment, proper spacing, scientific inputs. The women who'd always gardened this way were made to feel ignorant. Then around 2015, researchers started testing these old techniques. One by one, they were validated. The science caught up, and it admitted what those women knew by touch and observation. Today, we're looking at 10 techniques that were dismissed, discouraged, or actively suppressed. Real horticultural practices that threatened entire industries. Number 7 is going to make you question everything you've been told about watering. Let's start with the one they fought hardest to discredit. Method number 1, cold composting. Behind the garage, Grandma kept a pile. Kitchen scraps went there, grass clippings, autumn leaves. She never turned it, never monitored its temperature, never added anything she had to buy, just kept adding organic matter through the year and scooped finished compost from the bottom when she needed it. What she was doing is called cold composting in waste management literature. It's also known as passive composting. It's a legitimate technique where decomposition happens slowly without the heat generation of actively managed systems. But by the 1990s, garden centers were selling compost tumblers for hundreds of dollars. Books and workshops taught hot composting as the only proper method. You needed specific carbon to nitrogen ratios. You had to turn the pile every few days. You had to monitor internal temperature. Cold composting was presented as incomplete, slow, the wrong way to make compost. The reason hot composting became the promoted method is partly because it's faster, 3 months versus a year. But it's also because hot composting requires equipment, activators, and education that can be sold. What's actually true is that both methods produce usable compost. Cold composting supports different microbial communities than hot composting, including organisms adapted to cooler temperatures that remain active in soil through winter. The finished product from cold composting is biologically diverse. It works. It just doesn't require purchasing anything. Grandma wasn't being lazy or ignorant. She was practicing passive composting, a recognized technique that produces excellent results without equipment or active management. But that doesn't sell tumblers. Wait until you see what they said about Method 4. Method number 2, leaf mold. Every autumn, Grandma raked leaves into a corner of the yard and left them there, just piled them up and ignored them. Neighbors thought it looked messy. Some cities began requiring leaves be bagged and removed as yard waste. By the 80s and 90s, bagging leaves for municipal collection became standard practice. At the same time, garden centers began selling soil amendments designed to improve water retention, polymer crystals and conditioners that promised to help sandy soil hold moisture. What was happening in Grandma's ignored leaf pile is called leaf mold production. Leaf mold is the result of fungal decomposition of leaves. It's different from compost, which is primarily bacterial decomposition. Leaf mold has a distinct structure and properties. Research on soil amendments consistently shows that leaf mold has exceptional water-holding capacity. It can absorb and hold several times its weight in water. It improves soil structure, particularly in clay soils where it increases drainage, and in sandy soils where it increases water retention. These are documented properties of leaf mold in horticultural literature. Those leaves weren't trash or mess. They were slowly becoming a valuable soil amendment through natural fungal decomposition, an amendment that performs as well or better than products being sold for the same purpose. But if everyone knew that ignoring a pile of leaves for a year created something equivalent to purchased soil conditioners, that's lost revenue for both waste management and garden supply industries. She wasn't being lazy about yard cleanup. She was making leaf mold, a recognized soil amendment with measurable benefits. Method 6 is going to make you rethink your entire garden layout. Method number 3, trench composting. When kitchen scraps accumulated faster than the compost pile could handle, Grandma would dig a narrow trench between garden rows, bury the scraps, and cover them back over. Vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, wilted greens, right there in the garden bed where next season's plants would grow. Oh, this practice is called trench composting, also known as pit composting or in situ composting. It's a documented technique in agricultural and horticultural literature where organic matter decomposes directly in the soil rather than in a separate composting area. But by the 2000s, municipalities were promoting curbside compost collection programs. Companies sold compostable bags specifically for these programs. The message from waste management and extension offices was consistent. Composting should be done properly in designated systems, not buried in your garden. The actual science of trench composting shows it works effectively. Organic matter buried in soil decomposes through the same biological processes as surface composting. The soil environment actually provides consistent moisture and temperature. As decomposition proceeds, nutrients release directly into the surrounding soil where plant roots can access them. The method delivers slow-release fertilization exactly where it's needed. No separate composting infrastructure required. No bags to purchase. No collection fees. Just strategic placement of organic matter and patience while biology does its work. She wasn't being primitive or desperate. She was practicing in situ composting, using the soil itself as the decomposition environment and delivering nutrients directly to the root zone. But that approach doesn't generate revenue for waste management or require purchasing collection bags. Method 9 is when you'll understand how much of this was about economics, not science. Method number 4, permanent deep mulch. Grandma laid down thick layers of straw every spring, so thick the soil underneath was barely visible. She never tilled, never turned the soil, just added more mulch each year on top of the previous year's decomposing layers. This approach is called permanent mulch, or deep mulch gardening. Ruth Stout became well known in the 1950s and 60s for advocating this exact system. The technique is also related to what's now called conservation tillage or no-till gardening in agricultural science. But conventional agricultural advice through much of the 20th century emphasized regular tillage. Rototillers were marketed to home gardeners. Fertilizer companies promoted regular soil disruption, followed by synthetic inputs. Deep, permanent mulch was dismissed as impractical or problematic. The actual research on permanent mulch systems and no-till agriculture shows measurable benefits. Permanent organic mulch conserves soil moisture by reducing evaporation. It moderates soil temperature fluctuations. It suppresses weed germination by blocking light. As the mulch decomposes from the bottom up, it adds organic matter to the soil without tillage, building soil structure over time. The Rodale Institute has conducted long-term trials comparing different farming systems. Their research on organic no-till methods shows these systems can build soil, organic matter, support diverse soil biology, and produce well without requiring tillage or synthetic inputs. Grandma's thick blanket of straw wasn't mess or laziness. She was practicing permanent mulch cultivation, a system that builds soil while reducing labor and eliminating the need for equipment and many purchased inputs. But if everyone mulched heavily and stopped tilling, that eliminates markets for tillers and reduces dependence on fertilizers to replace organic matter lost through tillage. Her method worked with biology. The promoted methods required buying things. Method number 5, crop rotation with cover crops. Grandma never planted tomatoes in the same spot 2 years running. She rotated plant families through different beds on a schedule she kept in her head. Tomatoes where beans had been, beans where squash had been. She also grew cover crops in beds during the off-season. Clover, rye, or buckwheat that she'd turn under before spring planting. These are established practices in agronomy called crop rotation and cover cropping or green manuring. They're foundational techniques in sustainable agriculture with long documented histories, but as synthetic fertilizers became widely available in the mid-20th century, the message from fertilizer companies and some extension services shifted. Crop rotation was sometimes presented as less necessary when synthetic NPK could provide nutrients. The focus moved toward maximizing production through inputs rather than through biological soil management. The actual science of crop rotation shows it addresses problems synthetic fertilizers cannot solve. Rotating crops disrupts pest and disease life cycles that build when the same crop grows in the same location repeatedly. Different crops have different nutrient needs and root structures, so rotation helps balance soil fertility and improves soil structure. Cover crops, particularly nitrogen-fixing legumes like clover, add organic matter and can actually capture atmospheric nitrogen through symbiotic bacteria in their roots. When turned under, that captured nitrogen becomes available to subsequent crops. She wasn't being old-fashioned or making extra work. She was practicing integrated crop rotation and green manure cover cropping, using biological processes to maintain soil fertility and manage pests without relying on purchased inputs. The techniques work through mechanisms that synthetic fertilizers don't provide. But fertilizer companies benefited when farmers and gardeners believed rotation was unnecessary if you just added enough synthetic inputs. Method number 6, intercropping. Her garden looked chaotic to people used to orderly rows, lettuce tucked between tomato plants, radishes scattered among carrots, quick-maturing crops filling spaces around slower-growing ones, everything closer together than seed packet recommendations. What she was practicing is called intercropping or polyculture in agricultural literature. It's also related to intensive planting and companion planting systems. These are recognized approaches with research behind them. Seed packet spacing recommendations are often based on commercial agricultural needs where wide spacing allows for machinery access and makes mechanical harvesting possible. Those spacings made sense for farm-scale production, but weren't necessarily optimal for hand-tended gardens. Research on intercropping systems shows that thoughtfully designed polycultures can increase total yield per unit area compared to monoculture plantings. Different crops use different soil depths, have different nutrient needs, and mature at different rates. Mixed plantings can create beneficial microclimates where taller plants provide shade or wind protection for smaller ones. Some research also suggests diverse plantings can reduce pest problems compared to monocultures, though the mechanisms and effectiveness vary depending on the specific crops and pests involved. She wasn't overcrowding or being careless with spacing. She was practicing intensive intercropping that's appropriate for garden-scale production, even though it doesn't match commercial agricultural spacing requirements. The wide spacings on seed packets made gardens look orderly and professional, but they also limited how much food home gardeners could produce in available space. Less home food production means more dependence on purchased food. Her chaotic-looking garden was actually carefully organized polyculture. Method number 7, deep, infrequent watering. Grandma watered deeply and thoroughly, then waited several days before watering again. No daily sprinkling, no automatic timers running every morning. She would soak beds until water penetrated deep into the soil, then allow the soil to dry somewhat before the next watering. This approach aligns with what's called deep watering or drought training in horticultural practice. It's based on how plant root systems develop in response to water availability. But by the 90s, automatic irrigation systems became popular. Companies marketed timer-based systems that watered daily or every other day on fixed schedules. Daily watering became associated with proper lawn and garden care. The plant physiology involved is straightforward. Frequent shallow watering keeps moisture near the soil surface. Plant roots grow where water is consistently available. So shallow watering encourages shallow root systems. Deep roots aren't necessary if water appears daily at the surface. Deep, infrequent watering places, moisture deeper in the soil profile. Roots must grow deeper to access it. Deeper root systems have access to more soil volume, more nutrients, and moisture that's more stable because deeper soil doesn't dry out as quickly as the surface. Plants with deeper root systems show better drought tolerance. They're less stressed during hot weather. They require less frequent watering overall because they're accessing moisture from a larger soil volume. She wasn't following an old-fashioned schedule. She was encouraging deep root development through strategic watering patterns, creating more resilient plants that needed less frequent care. But automatic irrigation systems are expensive equipment purchases, and selling them requires convincing people that daily watering is necessary or beneficial, when it actually encourages plant dependence on constant irrigation. Method number 8, rainwater collection. She kept a barrel under the downspout. When rain came, she caught it. When the garden needed water, she used what she'd collected. Simple and practical. But in some municipalities, rainwater collection became restricted or complicated by regulations. The reasons varied by location, often related to water rights laws or concerns about mosquito breeding. Some areas made residential rainwater collection difficult or effectively discouraged it. Municipal water systems charge for water delivery. Residential outdoor water use, including garden irrigation, represents significant water consumption during growing season. When residents collect and use rainwater, that reduces municipal water sales. The actual properties of rainwater make it excellent for gardens. It's naturally soft water, free of the chlorine and fluoride added to municipal water supplies. The chlorine in treated municipal water can have mild inhibitory effects on some beneficial soil microorganisms. Rainwater collection is simply capturing precipitation that falls on your property and storing it for later use. It reduces demand on municipal systems during peak summer usage when water infrastructure is most strained. It provides plants with water that's often better suited to their needs than treated tap water. She wasn't doing anything complicated or unusual. She was practicing basic rainwater harvesting, using simple storage, a technique that's beneficial for both the gardener and the broader water system, but reduces revenue for municipal water utilities. The regulations and discouragement weren't primarily about garden best practices. They were about water system economics. Method number 9, season extension. When frost threatened in spring or fall, she didn't accept that the growing season was over. She covered plants with improvised protection, glass jars over seedlings, old windows propped up to create cold frames, anything that would trap warmer air close to the plants and block wind. These are examples of season extension techniques. Cold frames, cloches, and row covers are all established methods in horticulture for protecting plants from frost and extending the productive season into cooler months. The physics is basic. Trapped air warms from sun and soil heat. Clear materials allow light to penetrate while providing insulation. Even a few degrees of temperature difference can mean the difference between frost damage and continued growth. But as season extension became recognized as valuable, companies began selling specialized equipment. Commercial cold frames, fancy cloches, expensive row cover systems. Garden catalogs promoted these products as necessary for serious season extension. The actual physics works the same whether the protection is an expensive commercial product or a salvaged window frame. Transparent material that traps air and blocks wind provides the same basic protection either way. She was getting extra weeks of harvest in spring and fall using materials that cost nothing. The principle was identical to what companies were selling. The only difference was price and marketing. Resourcefulness was made to seem inferior to purchase solutions, even when the results were equivalent. Method number 10, allowing plants to bolt. When lettuce started sending up flower stalks in summer heat, she didn't immediately rip it out. She let it bloom. The tall stalks covered in small flowers attracted bees, hoverflies, tiny wasps, and other insects. After flowering, she'd collect the seeds for next year's planting. Letting plants complete their reproductive cycle serves multiple functions in garden ecology. The flowers provide nectar and pollen for beneficial insects. Many beneficial insects are predators or parasites of common garden pests during their larval stage, but they need flowers for food as adults. This is recognized in integrated pest management literature. Flowering plants throughout the garden support beneficial insect populations. Hoverfly larvae, for instance, are significant aphid predators. Parasitic wasps help control various caterpillar pests. But these beneficial insects need flower resources to complete their life cycles. Allowing some plants to flower and set seed also means saved seeds for next season. As long as the variety isn't a hybrid, seeds from bolted plants will grow true to type the following year. Modern garden productivity culture emphasizes removing plants the moment they stop producing the harvest you're growing them for. Every square foot must maximize food production at all times. From this perspective, a bolting lettuce plant is wasted space. But from an ecological perspective, that flowering plant is supporting the beneficial insects that protect everything else in the garden, and it's producing next year's seeds at no cost. She wasn't wasting space or being lazy. She was maintaining beneficial insect habitat and producing seeds, both of which reduced her dependence on purchased inputs. But seed companies profit when gardeners buy new seeds every year, and pesticide companies profit when beneficial insect populations are low and chemical controls seem necessary. Letting plants science, Bolt undermined both revenue streams. 10 techniques, 10 times they were dismissed or discouraged. And every single one is a legitimate practice with a proper name in horticultural or agricultural science. Your grandmother wasn't practicing folk traditions or superstitions. She was practicing recognized techniques without knowing the formal terms. She learned them from her mother, who learned them from hers, passing down methods that worked through observation and experience. Then we entered an era where everything had to be purchased, certified, and scientifically validated by institutions. The lived experience of generations of women became suspect if it couldn't be explained in peer-reviewed journals or if it didn't require buying something. But the research, when it finally caught up, validated what they'd known. The techniques work. They're sound. They're based on real biology and physics. The next time you're in your garden, remember that the quiet methods that don't require purchases often work just as well or better than what's being sold. They just don't generate revenue, which is why they're the last thing you'll hear about from commercial sources. If this reminded you of someone who knew these things before science bothered to study them, share it. Hit subscribe for more on traditional practices that turned out to be right. The grandmothers didn't need our validation, but maybe we needed to remember they understood something real.